Hey everyone, what is going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Beginner Bike Giveaway Series. We're here in the garage with the wonderful 2019 Yamaha R3 and the 2018 Suzuki SV650. Both of these bikes brand new. If it's your first time here, you saw that title of the video, today we're going to be talking about 5 things that I like and dislike about both bikes, but you gotta know that these bikes are actually being given away, which is really exciting. So we've got this wonderful 2019 Yamaha YZF R3 ready to be given away, and we've got this fantastic Suzuki SV650 ready to be given away. If you don't know how this works, you can hit the links below on Patreon to sign up and support each of these episodes to earn chances to win. Or if you don't want to do that, you can enter to win by buying some merch. Every $1 you spend gets you 1 entry to win. And of course, if you don't want to do any of that, you can also sign up entirely for free by following the links in the Patreon and looking at those directions to enter in for free. It's actually really cool. As a side note about that, I think it's really exciting because now that we have 2 bikes, we've got these 2 bikes, which is really amazing, you actually have a higher chance of winning than you had with any of the other bikes we did. So even though we have, I think at this point, like 1,050 patrons, because there are 2 motorcycles, that actually means that each person has twice as many chances to win. So when we drew for our KTM RC390, we had, like 800 people or something like that signed up with a bunch of different chances. But for this one, each bike is only 500 people right now-ish. So you actually have better chances to win. So if you feel discouraged, don't feel discouraged because you actually have a better chance of winning either one of these bikes. And our next giveaway, we're going to do 3, maybe even 4 bikes, so that's pretty cool. Without further ado, let's jump into 5 things I like and dislike about each of these motorcycles. We're going to start with the SV650. So we are starting off with the SV650 today, mostly because between me and you, I do like the SV650 more than the R3. It's just a torquier, more upright, kind of more fun motorcycle. But my first favorite thing about this bike is that wonderful 647, 649, don't quite remember, cc V-twin. This is a gem of an engine, I think, for the price point that you get this thing at. It's such a fun, awesome engine to enjoy. And another one of my favorite things about it is the sound that it makes. That's in relation to the engine, but the sound of this motorcycle is actually one of the best in its class, I think. It's a toss-up for me between a full exhaust FC07 and a full exhaust SV650. So it's definitely my first favorite thing about this bike. But of course, let me get a quick sound check for you guys of that wonderful V-twin exhaust. Alright guys, another one of my favorite things about the SV650, let's start it up actually, or otherwise I'll drain the battery. Put this baby into neutral. One of my favorite things about this bike, a good thing about it, is the ease of maintenance on it, man. Like, because it's a naked, if you have any issues with the radiator, it's right there. If you have any issues with oil or an exhaust or anything like that, I mean, everything you need is right there and accessible, other than, top-end stuff on this back cylinder right here. I mean, even some of the stuff over here you can really easily access, so I absolutely love how easy it is to maintain this motorcycle if you have a need for it. One thing I do really enjoy about the SV650 is its classic kind of motorcycle looks. I think even if you're a diehard, fully fared sport bike guy, if you're a dual sport guy, if you're a Grom type of dude, I think the SV650's looks are so amenable that really it would be difficult to find someone who thinks that it doesn't look, at least just good in general. One thing I will say though is it doesn't really stand out very much as opposed to the R3 that gets tons of looks and compliments and questions about it. The SV650 rides under the radar, but if that's something you're interested in, which I really like myself, that gives it a pretty big positive in my opinion. So SV650, sort of an under the radar styling, but that's a bit of a benefit to me. Now, in looking at the SV650, another one of the things I dislike about it, unfortunately, is the dash. If we're going to take a look here really quick, The dash is actually, when comparing it to some other offerings in the category, not exactly the best looking thing on the market. You know, especially even compared to the R3 or even the KTM Duke 390's new TFT dash. This does look a little old school. The one thing I will give it in its credit is it's extremely clear to read. I love having the rev counter right at the top, the speedometer right in the middle. You're never guessing at what RPM or what speed you're at, which is really great. But I will say one of my dislikes for the SV650 is this kind of old school dash. You feel like this bike hasn't really been updated and isn't really punching with some of the offerings in the class right now. But, you know, it is really, really doable with this dash.
One thing I don't really love about the SV650 though is the front brakes do feel a little spongy for some reason. Even though this bike is equipped with a dual disc braking system, for some reason it just feels a little bit spongy. So when you're coming up here on a little corner, you want to downshift, you don't really get a whole lot of braking feel out of it. You know, like it's, for some reason, like right here, like you get it, there's not a good amount of bite, it's just a little spongy. And maybe that's because I've been sort of ruined by, you know, Brembo systems on other braking platforms and all that kind of stuff. But this bike in particular does feel just a little too spongy for having a dual disc setup. So that's one thing I do dislike about it.
All right, guys, my number one gripe, I would say, and my least favorite thing about the SV650 is this right here. This might not look like much to you, but the throttle. The fact that it's so snatchy, the fact that this bike is marketed for beginners and yet this throttle is literally one of the snatchiest things I've ever felt. It's worse than the FC09 that I had. Has to be my least favorite thing about this bike. I'm an experienced rider, and even in low speeds, this thing still kind of surprises me in terms of its snatchiness and kind of what you expect it to do. So I don't know, for me it's really not that great. I think if you do end up getting this bike, if you do win it, or if you, you know, end up buying one, I think a new map is definitely in order. If you get an exhaust on it, definitely get a new fueling map on it, and then maybe that'll sort it out. But I believe this throttle is cable actuated, but the fueling itself is not. This is an EFI bike, so the mapping could definitely help, but it's got to be my least favorite thing about this bike.
One thing I do really enjoy about the SV650 is just how solid it feels. The motorcycle feels like it's entirely made of metal, but it doesn't feel heavy. It just feels like a really solidly built bike. And that's a hard feeling to explain, but compared to the FC07, which felt really plasticky and kind of, you know, not budget necessarily, but just felt like it was made of a lot of plastic. This bike has a much more standard kind of just metal gas tank and just a really solid feel about it, which I really enjoy. One thing I don't really love about this bike though is the suspension setup. I find that the front end is a little too squishy. I understand why they've done that. It's tuned for street use. And this is just coming from my own personal bias because I'm used to either like my Scrambler, which is a way more upright kind of dual sport motorcycle, and that, you know, kind of softer suspension makes sense when you're doing trails and stuff like that, or, you know, my Daytona, which has extremely stiff kind of Öhlins and, you know, race bike kind of setup. But this I just find that it's in the middle, but not in a great way. There just seems to be a little too much dive for the type of motorcycle this is. I'll try to show you guys here. I'll give this car some space and then brake a little bit. But if you notice, if you slam on the brakes, you get a lot of dive, more than you would really like. But, you know, given that it's a beginner's bike, a sort of first-timer's bike, or just a standard street bike, the dive itself gives you a lot of feedback of how hard you're braking. So for people who are still kind of figuring out the ropes to ride, I think that's a pretty good thing. But yeah, the suspension just, I don't know, it's just not really, I mean, look at that. It just completely just bounces so much. It's just not as stiff. And all you can adjust is preload in the rear. But that's okay because everything in this class doesn't really have adjustable suspension. You're going to have to start looking at things like, you know, Z900s, MT09s, that sort of stuff to find, you know, adjustable suspension. So I can't fault the SV650 too much for that.
Another thing I don't really love about the SV650 is how enormous this exhaust is. I know why they've done it. It's for Euro 4 emission standards. The new GSX-Rs are all like this too. But explain to me why other motorcycles don't have such ginormous exhaust cans here, bro. Luckily, this is something you can fix pretty easily. Like, all you have to do is just get a new slip-on and it solves the problem. But my God, look at this thing, bro. It literally looks like, I don't even know, like a supersized 2-liter Coke can. It is absolutely huge. But luckily we have a slip-on exhaust coming for it that's going to attach right over there. So yeah, that's going to make it a lot better. But boy, this exhaust is just huge. Definitely a dislike for me. Really kind of ruins the styling a little bit. And I would say the thing I love most about the SV650 is the just general value of it, right? Like, these bikes, brand new are $7,400 with ABS. But honestly, we picked up this 2018 model with 0 miles on it. It's brand spanking new for a little under $54 out the door. So that's a phenomenal deal for a bike that's this fun to ride and this kind of just easy to maintain and to have, and this kind of power. And I don't know, like, it's such a great value for money when you consider it. This is really similar to like used FC07s too. Like, you're just getting so much bike for the money. So I would definitely say that SV650 with its value proposition has to be the thing I love most about it.
Alrighty guys, we're now in the urban environment on the R3 to talk a little bit about things I like and don't like about it. I think the first thing that really stands out to me about the R3 is just how easy it is to ride. I think that's definitely one of my favorite things about this bike, and definitely for the class of bike that it is and where it kind of sits in the world. It's really important to have a bike that rides this nicely and easily. I think that's really, really cool that Yamaha did that. The throttle response is extremely forgiving. You could literally, like, I'm about to slow down here so I can't do it, but you could be here in second gear and just, you can really be super unnecessarily bad with the throttle, and it's really, really forgiving. So being that it's super easy to ride, definitely one of my favorite things about this little bike.
One of my favorite things about this motorcycle is the way that it looks. Oh my God. Guys, look at this motorcycle. This has to be my favorite thing about this bike. I think that, I've shown this motorcycle to plenty of people who both ride and don't ride. And in photos, in a lineup with this bike and other bikes that I have, everyone always talks about this bike. I mean, look at the MotoGP inspired little grills right there, the really aggressive front fascia. It's just a great looking bike. Like, you really can't get away from the fact that this is just a fantastic looking motorcycle. So that has to be my number one favorite thing about this bike. The next thing I really like about this bike is the fact that it now comes with proper tires on it. This might seem like a really specific sort of thing, but before Yamaha went with these Dunlops as factory option for the R3 right here, not option, rather, they come standard. They used to do these really terrible bias ply tires on the R3 that just felt so skittery and so crappy. It just did not match the character of the bike at all. But now it comes with these proper Dunlop Sport Max on here, and they're actually a really good tire. I really have a lot of fun with them, and really suits the nature of the motorcycle itself. So definitely hats off to Yamaha for putting a proper tire on this bike. But I also don't want to praise a fish for swimming, so I think Yamaha just now put a normal tire on this bike.
One thing that I don't love about this motorcycle, though, is how many turns it takes to get to full throttle over here on the throttle tube. And I know why that Yamaha has done this. It's because this class of motorcycle, you don't want it to go wide open throttle with a half turn of the tube. But at the same time, I think it kind of puts you at a bit of a disadvantage if you're going to go and ride other motorcycles, because if you're used to going completely wide open throttle, by twisting this all the way to wide open throttle, you're going to have a bad time adjusting to more normal motorcycle throttle. So that's definitely one thing I don't like as much about the R3, is this throttle tube that just is a little bit too wide. It also makes for downshifts to be a little trickier than they need to be. You really have to twist the throttle to get your proper downshift. So come here down to second gear, and then first gear. I can't do it, it's a bit of a steep hill. But yeah, you gotta just really just like twist it all the way. It's a bit silly.
All right, guys, my next gripe or dislike on the Yamaha R3 has to be this huge tail section right here. I know that most manufacturers nowadays do these kind of bigger tails like this, but man, this is just egregious. Look at the size of this thing. I think the only one that comes close is KTM's. KTM's tail fender, whatever you want to call it, the rear fender on the RC390 was bigger than this one, but this has to be one of the most egregious examples, so I definitely am not a huge fan of this big old tail on the R3.
This is Texas State Capitol, by the way, guys. Pretty cool. Side note. Another thing I dislike about this motorcycle, but at the same time I kind of like it, so this is a bit of a twofer for you. It is this engine. As much as I do love the fact that you really have to rev it out, and you know, it's like super fun to really just give it all these beans or whatever, but at the same time, you know, it doesn't make the world's greatest sound. That's I think an issue that a lot of people have with these small displacement parallel twins, is just like no matter what you do, they're just not going to sound great. I think these bikes with full systems sound pretty bad, honestly. I know that sounds kind of cruel, but I think these little parallel twins with like a full Akrapovic on them, they just sound kind of bad. But it is really fun for beginners to take a bike like this and rev it all the way to 12,000 RPM. It gives you that kind of, you know, entry-level sport bike kind of feel to it, right? It makes you feel like a bit of a MotoGP hero. So small parallel twin engine is both a good and a bad thing, in my opinion.
And of course, one thing that I think is probably the best thing about this motorcycle is its dash. I think Yamaha punches way above its weight class for this dash right here. Really cool full digital display right here, looking a little bit better than the Suzuki. But as some commenters have pointed out when I mentioned that this was the best beginner bike dash, the new KTM Duke 390 has a full TFT display on the Duke 390, so that's pretty tough to compete. But I think this one is still pretty dang cool.
Another thing I really don't love about this motorcycle is the very wooden feeling brakes. This is something that a lot of reviewers have talked about, but because this is a budget beginner bike, when you jump on the brakes like this, you get basically no feel from it whatsoever. It's pretty wooden, it's pretty unresponsive. I would say that for people looking to get this motorcycle, one of the first things you should take a look at is a bit of a brake upgrade. Maybe some high performance pads, maybe some better fluid in the little reservoir here. Anything you can do short of like swapping it out for like a big Brembo caliper or something, but boy, these brakes are just not very good. That's definitely something I dislike about this motorcycle.
And one of the other dislikes of the R3 for me, unfortunately, it's related to its looks. It's these ridiculous turn signals that Yamaha consistently puts on their motorcycles. I don't understand why we're still doing this. In the year of our Lord 2019, the Yamaha insists on giving us these bulbous, enormous, non-LED turn signals. They just look bad. And they also look bad whenever you're riding down the road and they just kind of jiggle in the wind. I've seen some shots of this bike going down the road, and it's just hilarious, this like gorgeous looking little starter motorcycle, and then these things are just doing one of those in the wind. It's ridiculous. So that would definitely be one of my other dislikes for the R3, unfortunately. I really feel like if Yamaha just put a proper, you know, little LED signal on here, increase the price by like $20, or, you know, just cut a little bit smaller of a profit margin on it and just give us LEDs. Everyone else is doing LEDs. Give us LEDs, Yamaha. Come on, what are you doing?
The other thing I really like about this motorcycle is how slick the transmission feels compared to the SV650 and even my Scrambler, but not my Daytona, because that has the best transmission. But I think for this price point, this transmission is absolutely incredible. It shifts incredibly smooth, feels really nice and tactile. You would not suspect, if you put this transmission on a much more expensive motorcycle, you would not expect it to perform the way that it does. I think it's also due to the fact that this bike has a slipper clutch. I have to double check that, but I believe it has a slipper clutch, and so that allows it to shift a little bit smoother and easier on the downshifts especially. But This bike definitely punches above its weight class in terms of its transmission, so definitely a big plus for me for the little Yamaha.
So guys, that's going to wrap up my thoughts on my things that I like and dislike on both the SV650 and the Yamaha R3. Again, if you want a chance to win these motorcycles for free, click the link below for our Patreon or for our merch pays. Every dollar you spend gets you an entry to win, so go and check that out. Thanks so much for watching. I will tune in next time. So will you. You will tune in next time. We'll all tune in. And I'll see you later.